I got a JCM900 SLX here, and the owner says input jack, intermittent, makes noise, etc., etc. But when I plugged in to test it, I get no signal whatsoever. But I do hear a low hum in the output, so let's go in and see what's up. I thought I was recording when I got to the point where I discovered a bad phase inverter tube in the amp, but it turns out I was not, so I'm recording this at the end of everything else you've just seen, though I'm putting it here in the sequence where it goes logically in the troubleshooting process. As soon as I pulled the chassis out, I saw this white peeking out from the tube shield, and I knew that this tube had lost vacuum, and in fact, it cracked all the way around. This tube was no more, joined the choir tube invisible, etc., etc. So I put a different tube in the amp. That's how you could hear it. But my concern was that once that phase inverter had stopped operating, that the plate voltage might exceed the 400 volts rating of the coupling caps on the output. It did not, but in this next bit of video, you'll see me confirming that, because if those voltages exceed 400 volts, those caps can begin to leak, as I mentioned in the video on the Mesa DC5. And I have seen that happen in JCM900s where those caps leak and all of a sudden the bias gets all screwy and output tubes like to burn, baby, burn. Anyway, on with the diagnostics. All right, I have the tubes out of the amp, the 34s out of the amp. I put a 12X7 back in the phase inverter for a moment. These two blue caps are the output coupling caps that I was talking about. They are indeed 400 volts. Let's see if these have gone bad as a result of that phase inverter tube dying. Let's power this up and see. All right, with no output tubes in place, we have at the grid of each output tube, negative 45.6, negative 45.5, negative 45.5, negative 45.4. On this model, only these two of the four output tubes have grid stoppers. So it looks like we're not leaking voltage, which is good, but it's something I wanted to check, and I'll show you why. Let me pull the phase inverter tube real quick. Oh, let me show you this first. With the phase inverter tube in place, at the plate of the phase inverter, this first plate, we've got 244 volts. Let's take that tube out and see where that voltage is at. 343. So we're okay in this amp. But that was my concern when that phase inverter tube was dead. Would that exceed the 400 volts? It did not. So I can put the output tubes back in place. Let me do that and we'll see where we're at. Maybe at that point it's just a bad input jack. Yep, bad input jack. Bad input jack, mildly dirty pots. Let me pull that board, and I'm gonna pull the speaker board as well, because there's often a mistake in the wiring on the speaker jacks on 900s, and it doesn't take long to fix it. And I know that's not on the repair ticket, but I'd rather fix it before the owner discovers a horrible problem, like that sound. In my previous video on the Friedman Runt 20, I mentioned how nice it was that all the jacks for different functions in the amp were on different boards. You didn't have to pull the whole thing just to access the output jacks, and that the input jacks and pots weren't supporting the weight of the entire board, and how good that was. Here we have Marshall. So let's look at the output jacks first. All right, they have fixed the normaling issue on this board revision. On earlier board revisions, there was a normaling problem where one of the jacks would not, you could have a situation where you wouldn't have an output ground reference and things can burn. Looking beneath the board, everything looks pretty okay there, so that's good, but it's always worth checking. On the rest of this, these solder joints are actually fine. I think the jack contacts are just dirty, but this jack has absolutely no mechanical strength left to it. Let me get another similar jack and show you what it should be like. All right, putting a Neutrik plug into this cliff jack. Just no resistance whatsoever. Here's another cliff jack. This one's a solder lug rather than a PCB, but the jack itself is the same. Has that nice mechanical sense to it. So I'm just going to change out this jack, and I might do the foot switch jack at the same time because it's also pretty wimpy. Let me check the speaker jacks and all that. Sometimes things just get fatigued, and you don't want to lose a speaker connection because of an old $1.75 jack. And I'm really not trying to upsell anything for the owner, but this cap is bulging. That's not the black plastic coming up. That's actually domed from this cap being swollen. And these caps here are just slightly doming. You can just see the beginnings of the bulge there. These others are still flat, but these are the big boys in here, so to speak, and they're about to go boom. So I will call the owner and let him know he needs about $4 worth of capacitors. I'd like to change all these out at the same time, make about $10 worth of capacitors. And he needs 4 Cliff mono jacks, so about $10 on the jacks. So, you know, it's not a lot of money to spend, but I'll call him and let him know what I found and why. Actually, I'll send him a link to this video because it explains it much better in real time. And that way he can see what I'm talking about and know that I'm not just inventing things to sell an extra $20 worth of parts and a little bit extra time.